Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about all of the books that I read in January, and I'm happy to say that I actually had quite a few really good reads for this past month, which is awesome because I feel like it's kickstarting the year off with like good reads and it bodes well for the rest of the year. And also, one of my New Year's resolutions or goals was that I really wanted to do more physical reading this year. So I've really been like kind of pumping that up as well, which is really exciting. A lot of these books I did talk about in my vlog. I'll have it posted somewhere here, where I read your guys' suggestions. So a lot of them I'm not going to go into too much detail because I have a vlog where I read them and gave a lot of my thoughts on them over there. So we're going to start off the video with a new cozy mystery series called Witch and Famous by Angela M. Sanders. So I had read in December 2 of the other ones. This is book number 3. So this one is basically about a woman who is, for lack of a better word, she's like kind of in the witness protection program, and she moves to this small town to accept the head librarian position there. And she starts to realize a couple of things. Number one, that she is magical. She's actually a witch. And her powers are that she can talk to books, or books can talk to her. So it's really cool. Like when I was actually just thinking this last night when I was working at the library. I had somebody come in and ask me for a recommendation on a type of book that I typically don't read very often. And I was thinking to myself, I wish I had this power that this girl in this book had, because people will come in and ask her for recommendations and the books like kind of whisper to her. And so like this book will be like, me, choose me. It's just like, I feel like that would be the best gift ever if you are a librarian. But so anyway, so she kind of uses her powers to solve crimes that are going on in her neighborhood. So of course, in every single mystery, there's a new mystery. Somebody else gets killed or murdered, and she kind of uses her new powers to talk to the books, and they kind of help her figure out the mystery. So it's really kind of cool. Something kind of different. You guys know that I love like witchy sorts of reads, so I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It's a new cozy mystery series that I'm really liking. The next book, book 4, comes out I think next month, so I'm definitely going to be continuing on with that series. The next one that I read was Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder by Joanne Fluke, and this one I gave a 3 stars. This was one of the ones that I read for my series where I was reading books that you guys recommended to me. I didn't particularly like this one a whole lot, and I think mostly it's due to the fact that it's a little bit like time irrelevant. So just some of the terminology that was used, there were some slurs that were used that we wouldn't say today, or most of us wouldn't say today. People shouldn't be saying today. So just a couple of stuff like that kind of threw me off. But basically this one, which is kind of weird because like this, I know that this author is very popular, and I know that this series is very popular. And I just kind of wonder why. Like I feel like there's better cozy mysteries out there, ones that I have read easily that top this one a lot. But this one is basically about a cookie maker, and this book, one of her regular clients ends up being murdered, and he was found with a box of her cookies next to him. And so because of that fact, even though it was very clear that it wasn't her cookies, like her cookies weren't poisoned, but she kind of gets this idea into her head that, well, oh, my cookies are found next to him. People are going to think that my cookies were poisonous and it's going to be bad for business. So she goes about trying to solve this murder. And it was kind of a weird reason for her to start solving the murder in the first place. But yeah, it was okay. It was all right, but definitely kind of some of the terminology used and the slurs used took away from it a lot for me. And I mean, that's just like a time thing, right? Like a lot of, like this book I think was written like 20 years ago, and things have changed quite a bit since then. So, I mean, I guess I can't really hold that against it, but at the same time, it did kind of throw me off reading it in today's day and age. So next was a book by Grady Hendrix, and this was free on Audible last month, which is awesome. And that was the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So I kind of seem to have a love and hate relationship with Grady Hendrix. I typically feel that all of his books sound really good and they have a really good premise to them, and they're ideas that most people aren't coming up with, right? Like there's something different. But it's usually the execution that kind of gets me, and I don't typically love his books. They're usually kind of like middle of the road for me, but I actually really enjoyed this one, and I gave it a 4 out of 5. So basically we have a book club and they start to realize that there's something strange about one of the new people that move into the neighborhood. And they are kind of realizing that maybe this guy might be a vampire, and they're trying to figure out how to go about getting rid of this vampire. And they work together in some capacities, but there's our main character who is kind of leading it, and she has some trouble sometimes convincing the other women in this book club, like, hey, something's not right with this guy. So I really did enjoy that one. I listened to it on Audible, and I highly recommend the Audible version of it. The next book that we're going to talk about is Before She Disappeared by Lisa Gardner. And this one was a thriller. I gave it a 3, so it's kind of just like a middle of the road. And it is the start of a series. So it's the Frankie Elkin series. And the whole premise of this series is that our main character, Frankie, she's an ex-alcoholic who basically travels around the country trying to find missing people. So she takes on cases that are kind of stagnant. She takes on cold cases, and she is really, really good at it. She's not a private eye by any means. She's just like a woman that just travels around doing this. She's good at it. She's figured out how to find these people, and she's trying to bring home this missing girl in this town that basically people have just started to forget about. The case has been going nowhere, and she moves and tries to help solve this case. So basically we're just following her as she solves this missing person's case, and kind of tries to do it on a deadline because she fears that the girl may be dead. And so we're just following her along as she does this, which, I mean, it was okay. Like, it was just kind of a standard mystery. I would say it's probably more of a mystery than a thriller, like mystery / thriller. It was okay. There was nothing wrong with it. There's nothing exceptional about it. It was okay. So next is a book that I absolutely loved so much, and that is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. And I have been reading a ton of V.E. Schwab lately. I think I said this in my last wrap up where I read one of her other books, but I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. That was my favorite book of last year. And then after that, like, because I loved it so much, I really got interested and wanted to start reading more of V.E. Schwab's work. So for Christmas, I bought myself a whole bunch of her novels, and I've been just like flying through them, and I've just been loving everything that I've been reading from her. And this is no exception. I gave this a 5 out of 5. And basically we follow our main character who has been abandoned at an orphanage for girls, like a home for girls, when she was 2 years old. She cannot speak. She can hear fine, but she cannot speak. And this kind of sets her apart from the other girls. She has a hard time fitting in, and she also has this kind of secret that she can see ghosts and spirits. So she has kind of learned how to deal with that on her own. And she struggles. Like, she really hates where she's living. She worries that she's never going to get out of the place that she's living, because even the only way really for her to get out is for her to marry. And because she can't speak, like, she's worried that she'll never be married. She doesn't even really want to be married. But she just kind of hates her life where she's at right now. But one day she ends up getting a letter from someone who claims to be her uncle, and says that they have been looking for her for years, and they want her to come home to Gallant House and to live with them. They've been looking for her everywhere. So the next day she is shipped off, and she goes to meet her uncle. When she gets to Gallant House, she realizes that nobody knows where this letter came from. Nobody at Gallant House sent it to her, and they don't want her there. And she has one other thing is that she has her mother's journals from before she was deposited on this orphanage. And one of the biggest things is that at the end of one of the journals, her mother warns her against ever going back to Gallant House, but she really has no other choice. Either she goes back to the orphanage or she stays here. And so she kind of tries to get the people that are living there to let her stay. And she starts to realize that there's some strange things about the house. So there's definitely like ghosts there, which she can see. But there's really strange things about the grounds of the house. So she starts to notice that the people that live there act really strange. Nobody's really telling her what's going on. There's kind of like this hedge that separates the grounds from the rest of the house, and it's like meticulously maintained to the point where it's like there's something going on with it, but she can't figure out what. And that is where our story progresses from there. So I don't want to obviously spoil that for you guys too much, but I highly recommend this one from V.E. Schwab. So good. So next I listened to a classic. This is also on Audible, and it was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And I gave this one a 3. And one thing that I will say is that it kind of reminded me like when I read Frankenstein for the first time and realized that it is so much different than what you end up thinking when you're a kid. Because whenever, lots of times in like kids cartoons and around Halloween and stuff like that, they portray Frankenstein as well as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde a certain way, and you kind of get the idea of these stories and what these stories entail from that. And then when you actually read the real stories, they're totally different. So I was kind of surprised how this one ended up playing out. It was good. I don't think it really, I'm not a huge classic lover. I think for the time it would have been scary. Of course, now in today's day and age, it wasn't scary, especially for somebody who reads a lot of horror and a lot of thrillers. It wasn't scary to me at all, but I can see how back in the time when it was written, it would have been scary and it would have been something, you know, different and interesting to read. But yeah, I was kind of surprised by how the story actually went and how it was really not anything like what I thought it was growing up listening to the story as a kid. Next is a book by Harlan Coben, The Boy from the Woods. And this was a thriller that I ended up giving a 4 out of 5 to. So basically we meet our protagonist, who is Wild, and he is a boy that was found when he was like, I think 4 or 5, and he was basically like a real life Tarzan. He was just found in the woods. He had been living there for who knows how long. He didn't remember anything about his life before. All he knows is that as long as he could remember, he was surviving on his own in the woods. And we fast forward to when he is a grown-up, and he has kind of become like a military person, and he's very good at like tracking, and he ends up trying to help his godson find a missing girl from his school. So there is a girl that his godson goes to school with, and she's completely ostracized by the school, by the class. Everyone makes fun of her. She's a teenager. Everyone makes fun of her, and eventually she ends up going missing. So he kind of uses his tracking abilities to help find her, and it's a thriller. So we follow him along. He ends up finding her once, and then she goes missing again. And yeah, it was pretty good. Like, and I really enjoyed the main character. I really like how he was depicted, and I like his, like, I'm a really character-driven reader, and I have to be able to identify with the character that I'm reading about, and I was really able to get inside his head and kind of see where he was coming from, which is awesome because it was a type of character that typically a person wouldn't be able to get inside their head because he is so different from us. But the way that he was written, like, you really could sympathize with him and kind of understand where he was coming from in life. So I gave that one a 4 out of 5. So next is another book that I read for the challenge of reading your guys' recommendations, and that is The Nothing Man by Catherine Ryan Howard. So this one was a thriller that I gave a 5 out of 5 to. I really enjoyed this one. And basically we follow a woman who was one of the surviving victims of a serial killer called the Nothing Man. So when she was 12 years old, he came into her house and he murdered her entire family, and she was able to escape. She hid in the bathroom, and for whatever reason, he didn't check the bathroom, and she escaped. Growing up, she obviously had a lot of issues from this, and she finally gets to a point where she is now writing a book about this experience and about this man's murdering spree, right? He has never been caught. He's called the Nothing Man. And she kind of taunts him in this book. So like I said, he's never been caught, and she kind of taunts him in this book, like as if she's kind of wanting him to come out. And unbeknownst to her, it's working. So we also get the perspective of the serial killer himself. We see him, we meet him, we get into his head, and we kind of catch up with him as he realizes that this book has come out and this book is about him. And he buys this book, he's reading it, and he's furious about it. And we are seeing both perspectives. So that is what I really, really enjoyed about this book. It's something kind of different. Like, we don't typically get the serial killer's perspective when we are reading a thriller, right? So that was kind of cool. And yeah, so we follow the case as they are trying to continue finding this man, and we see what he's doing behind the scenes as well to avoid detection, but also try to prove a point. He is very upset with the things that she has written about him. Like I said, she kind of calls him out, and so he starts to try to come after her, and she is trying to come after him. So that one was a 5 out of 5. And then once again, another book for the challenge was The Devil Aspect by Craig Russell. This was once again another 5 out of 5. This was a really scary book. And it follows a psychiatrist who gets a new job basically in this small town where there is, like, up on a high mountainside, there is an old sanatorium that, or I don't think it was a sanatorium in years, it was an old castle, that's what it was. And it was an old castle, and they've converted it into a sanatorium. And the sanatorium houses 6 of the most prolific serial killers that the European world has ever seen. And this is a historical fiction, so it's back in the 1930s. And our doctor is just kind of starting to develop the theories of multiple personality disorder. So these 6 serial killers are nicknamed the Devil 6, and he starts getting to work with them, and we get to meet all of these serial killers. So we get to see there's a chapter on each of them about what their crimes were and kind of what led them to this point in their life and what happened to lead up to their crimes. So we get to meet each of them, and each of them gets, like, worse and worse. So we start off with, like, the most tame case, and we go up to the worst one. So of course, like, reading about their crimes was scary, but also, like, really sad. There were some points, like, we get some backstory as to what happened to these characters to turn them into these monsters, and a lot of that was really sad. There was definitely a twist at the end that I did not see coming, so I really, really enjoyed this one. Very entertaining. I couldn't put it down, and I enjoyed it so much. It was definitely a 5 out of 5. The last book that I read for that challenge was another cozy mystery, and that was Crime and Poetry by Amanda Flower. And I really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving this one a 5 out of 5, and it is the first in a series called A Magical Bookshop Mystery. I do plan on continuing with this series as well. But basically we have our main character who is in college, and, like, she's in her 30s, and she has gone through a lot of schooling, and she's almost done her schooling. And she's in, like, literature is her field. And her grandmother owns this bookshop, and her grandmother kind of tricks her into coming back into this small town where she grew up. Her mother passed away when she was a teenager, and she ended up moving in with her grandma, and her grandmother raised her. But there starts to be a mystery that's revealed to us about the bookshop. So the bookshop is magical, and there is a connection between her grandmother and the books that ends up being kind of, like, passed down to her. And so her grandmother wants her there to kind of take over this bookshop and be, like, magic, I guess. We'll just say magic. I really don't want to ruin it for you guys. And then, of course, while she is there ends up being a murder. So the man who is murdered is her grandmother's boyfriend, and her grandmother ends up becoming a person of interest in this murder, and our main character knows that her grandmother did not do this, so she sets out to prove her grandmother's innocence. So I really enjoyed this one. I liked the town, I liked the mystery, I liked pretty much everything about it. The only thing that I didn't like about it that was kind of weird was there's a few times with a few different men in this story that are interested in her, and that she doesn't, I don't know if that she doesn't feel comfortable, or that she just doesn't, like, say, I'm not interested. And so she kind of tries to say it without really saying it, and she's coming across as not being heard, and that just kind of, like, rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. Because I feel like so often, like, women, we don't feel comfortable rejecting a man's advances. And so oftentimes you'll see women saying things like, I have a boyfriend, rather than just saying, no thanks, I'm not interested. And that's something that, you know, like, we try to be nice, and we don't want to come off as a bitch, right? And that's something that really bothers me, and that I feel like women need to be more empowered to just be like, no, I'm not interested, please leave me alone. And that's something that I really wish this main character would have been able to do in this book, but she just wasn't. She kind of tiptoed around it, and then people were, like, pitting her in relationships with one or more of these men, and she was like, oh, but no, I'm not with him. And, like, they're just running with it, right? And so that kind of irked me a bit. But regardless, I really did like the book. I liked the mystery, I liked the characters, and I gave it a 5 out of 5. So my next physical read after the Devil's Six, I wanted something a little bit lighter, and so I ended up picking up Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia, and I really enjoyed this one. This is not typically one that I would pick up, but I just heard so much good things about it on BookTube, and honestly, I really liked the cover. And so I ended up picking this one up, and I just wanted something kind of light, and I really enjoyed it. So basically, we follow our main character, Eliza, and she is the author of a web comic that is like huge. It has gone viral, it has blown up. Her family doesn't really understand how big it actually is, and they don't even realize that she's making like a ton of money off of it. But it's huge, like huge, huge, huge. And she has millions of followers, millions of readers, and she has kind of secluded herself. She's very like an angsty teenager, and she just kind of like holds herself up in her room whenever she gets home, and she just has friends online. She doesn't really have any friends in school, and her whole life is online until she ends up meeting a new guy that comes to school, and she realizes that he is her biggest, like one of her biggest supporters. So there's like in her, what's it called, like her, I don't know, her chats, her chats, I guess, her commenters, there is one that kind of like stands out above the rest, and he's like kind of her biggest fan, and she realized that this is the new guy that has come to her school, and she starts to get closer to him. She knows who he is, but he doesn't know who she is, and yeah, so of course mayhem ensues from that because she's keeping a gigantic secret like this from him. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 5 out of 5. It was just like a good YA contemporary. And one of the biggest things that I liked about it was the character growth of Eliza. She definitely, like from beginning to end, changes a lot, and she kind of like realizes some things about her life that she needs to change. And the last book that we're going to talk about today is Real Murders by Charlaine Harris, and this one I rated a 3 out of 5. Once again, this was the last book that I did for that challenge, and it was another cozy mystery series. So this is the Aurora Tiergarten series, which a lot of you probably have read. This is once again really huge series, and one that I just wasn't really sure why it's as big as it is. It was okay. But we follow Aurora Tiergarten, and she is a part of a group that meets once a month, and it's like a true crime club. So a true crime book club, but they like dress up and like they discuss the cases and whatever. And during one of these meetings, one of the people that are part of this book club is found murdered. So of course she becomes a suspect. She's trying to clear her own name and trying to get to the bottom of who actually did this. So it was an okay average cozy mystery. I don't know that it should be as big as it is, but maybe that's just, obviously that's just me because it's huge for a reason, right? But yeah, so anyways, you guys, those are the books that I read in the month of January. I had quite a few books that I really enjoyed, so that gives me a lot of hope for the rest of the months of 2023. Let me know in the comments down below, of course, what you ended up reading and what your thoughts on them were, and especially if you ended up reading anything that I read, I would love to know your thoughts on them. Go and check out that video that I did. I'll have it linked somewhere. It's on my channel. Where I read your guys' recommendations, and of course leave me more recommendations in the comments down below, because maybe I'll choose your recommendation for the next time that I do a vlog like that. Anyways, I hope you guys are having an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!